Eagle 4718, LaGuardia, runway 4, position, hold traffic to land 31.
Position runway 4, Eagle Flight 4718.
Piedmont 4203, clear to land 31, and 36012, traffic hold on 4. Cactus 1549, runway 4, cliff takeoff.
Cactus 1549, clear.
49.
Flight 1549 started like any other routine flight off LaGuardia. He's going to Charlotte. It's a Westgate departure. So when we're departing runway 4, takes off, turns left to a 360 heading, maintaining 5,000.
The weather was good. The snow had stopped, the visibility had improved, the winds were light out of the north.
It was just that crystal clear air. It seemed like you could see forever as we took off from LaGuardia.
The takeoff from LaGuardia was one of Jeff's first chances to fly the airplane on this trip.
One leg the captain flies, one leg the first officer flies. Just happened to be my turn to fly the airplane.
Cactus 1549, contact near departure connect.
Good day.
The tower works the departures on the runway. From when they take off, they switch over control of the aircraft to the New York Tracon, which is located in Westbury. It's a separate radar facility, and that's where we take over.
We were handed off to the first radar controller, the departure controller, and that happened to be a young man named Patrick Harden. And we switched to his frequency. I'll tell him we were at 700 feet climbing, and he gave us an immediate clearance to 15,000 feet.
Cactus 1549, near departure to contact, I maintain 15,000.
Maintain 15,000, Cactus 1549. From that vantage point, we could see much of the New York metropolitan area, and including the Hudson River. It was a beautiful day.
Cactus 1549, turn left lane 270.
100 seconds after takeoff, we were approaching 3,000 feet in our climb to 15,000 feet. We had just retracted the landing gear and flaps and completed the after takeoff checklist.
And I remember my attention being drawn to something that was slightly above my eyesight and slightly to our right, and it was this line of birds.
These were large birds, a large flock of Canada geese, and they weigh 8 or 10 pounds with 5-foot or 6-foot wingspans.
And they are far too close to fly around. And it was only a moment later that I heard Sully say birds, and then we just started hearing them impact the aircraft.
I could feel and hear the thumps and thuds as we struck the birds across the leading edges of both wings and into the center of the core of both jet engines. Immediately, I could hear terrible noises I'd never heard in an airplane before and feel terrible vibrations. And then within seconds, I could smell coming into the cabin air the burning bird odor from the engines.
And it was a split second later, but it was a second later. Both engines just suddenly lost thrust.
The thrust loss was sudden, complete, and bilaterally symmetrical. In other words, it happened with both engines failing simultaneously. And I could hear the sickening ooh spin down of the turbines as that occurred.
I remember the airspeed tape was just unwinding.
It felt as if the forward motion of the airplane nearly stopped in midair.
It's almost like your mind stops working for a moment while you evaluate the situation and try to make sense of it.
It was shocking, more than anything I experienced in 42 years of flying and 20,000 hours in the air.
I remember I said, oh shit.
I could feel my blood pressure shoot up, my pulse spike. I sensed my perceptual field narrow because of the stress.
But then slowly your mind starts working again, and it starts working quicker and quicker and quicker.
I remember vividly my first 3 thoughts in those seconds. This can't be happening. And that was followed immediately by, this doesn't happen to me. And then my third thought was a realization that unlike every other flight I'd had, this one probably would not end on a runway with the aircraft undamaged. And I was okay with that, as long as I could solve the problem.
Sully instantly started the auxiliary power unit.
It was imperative that we not lose electrical power.
That is something that's in the checklist, but it's down in the checklist. It's not something that you instinctively do or that we're trained to do as a memory item. But in our case, his starting that APU was very, very important to us because it requires a lot of time to start, and time was something that we did not have.
And then I took control of the airplane. I said, my aircraft. And even in the heat of the moment, Jeff responded verbatim with our important transfer of aircraft control protocol when he answered, your aircraft. And then I said, get the QRH.
So I instantly reached for my quick reference handbook and started to look for the dual engine failure checklist.
And then I made the one radio call. Mayday, mayday, mayday.
This is Cactus 1539. Hit birds. We've lost thrust on both engines. Returning back towards LaGuardia.
Okay, you need to return to LaGuardia. Turn left heading up 220.
220.
My first response was I had to let the tower know that there was an emergency returning. He said he wanted to go back to LaGuardia and I was going to make that happen.
Tower, stop your departure. He's got emergency returning. Who is it? It's 1529. He bird strike. He lost all engine. He lost the thrust in the engines. He's returning immediately.
Cactus 1529. Which engines?
He lost thrust in both engines, he said.
Got it.
But at that point, we didn't have thrust, and so we were using gravity to provide the forward motion of the airplane, to glide downhill. The airplane was still fully controllable. However, I knew that my flight path was soon going to intersect the surface of the Earth.
The checklist for this particular emergency was 4 pages long. It was really designed to be done at 30,000 feet. It wasn't designed to be done at 3,000 feet in 3 minutes' time.
When I first realized the depth of the emergency, I didn't really think about much. I was just really focused on trying to solve the problem, trying to listen to the pilot, understand what he needed, and try to accomplish that, and offer him, different avenues, different routes, different runways for him to land, so that all options were available to him.
Patrick had initially assigned us a heading to the southwest. So first I considered returning to LaGuardia, and as Patrick was trying to arrange that for me, I was evaluating that option's worthiness.
Cactus 1529. We can get it for you. Do you want to try to land 1313?
We're unable. We may end up in the Hudson.
I suspected early on that we would end up in the river, that we wouldn't be able to glide as far as any runway, but I knew I had to consider that possibility. I knew I had to think about trying to do that.
All right, Cactus 1549. It's going to be left traffic to runway 31.
Unable.
When Sully said that we may end up in the Hudson, frankly, I thought that was our only option. Looking around very quickly, really all we had was the possibility of going back to LaGuardia or the Hudson River. Otherwise, as you can imagine, it's just nothing but skyscrapers, roads, houses. It's a very congested area.
If I had chosen to turn back toward LaGuardia and try to reach what turned out to be an unobtainable destination, it would have been an irrevocable choice.
If he had decided to go to LaGuardia, he would have had to fly over the Bronx, parts of New York City.
If I had collided with buildings or with terrain on the way to the airport, likely everyone on the airplane would have perished and possibly many people on the ground.
What's over to our right? Anything in New Jersey? Maybe Teterboro?
Okay, yeah, off your right side is Teterboro Airport. Do you want to try to go to Teterboro?
Yes.
After all of the options were exhausted at LaGuardia, Sully asked me about Teterboro, which was off his right side in New Jersey. I thought it was kind of a long shot, but that's not for me to question. I just, if he wants an airport cleared, that's what I do. So I hit the line at Teterboro.
Teterboro, Cactus 1529 over the George Washington Bridge, wants to go to the airport right now. Does he need assistance? Yes, it was a bird strike. Can I get him in for runway 1? Runway 1, that's good.
I remember pausing in my checklist and looking out at Teterboro. And then I started to see it rise in our windscreen, which to us as pilots means you can't stretch your glide to it. We would be into the buildings before we ever got to the airport.
Cactus 1529, turn right 280, you can land runway 1 at Teterboro.
Sully didn't respond right away. And I remember I was turning to him to say, you're not going to try for Teterboro, when he said, we can't make it, we're going to be in the Hudson. And I remember thinking to myself, good.
We can't do it.
Okay, which runway would you like at Teterboro?
We're going to be in the Hudson.
Sully's telling me something that I really don't want to hear.
I'm sorry, say again, Cactus?
I heard the words, but I really didn't want to accept it. To me, that was an admission that he was crash landing, and my thoughts were the Ethiopian flight, where the wingtip hits the water right before they're about to land, and it just starts doing cartwheels in the water. I mean, that's what I was envisioning was going to happen.
Shortly after Patrick Harden had begun to try to arrange an arrival into Teterboro for us, I said, this is the captain, brace for impact.
That's significant because the flight attendants start into their emergency procedures.
Even through the hardened cockpit door, I could hear the two flight attendants in front, Donna and Sheila, and I'm sure Doreen was doing the same in the back, begin shouting their commands to the passengers in unison. Brace, brace, heads down, stay down.
Cactus 1549, radar contact is lost. You also got Newark Airport up at 2 o'clock in about 7 miles.
When I lost radar with him, that was kind of the end for me. I thought probably everyone was dead and that I was involved with the modern worst aviation incident in modern times, and that was going to be my legacy.
Cactus 1529, you saw him?
I think he said he was going in the Hudson.
As soon as they could, they got someone to relieve me from position because at that point I was in no condition to continue working traffic.
Of course, Jeff and I are working together using the checklist, trying to regain thrust.
But the truth of the matter is, these engines were never going to restart again because of the damage that was done to them.
As we approached the river, the high rises and the bluffs on both sides of us were beginning to tower over us.
I remember it was kind of an odd feeling to me as the skyscrapers rose up so close off of our left and the buildings of New Jersey off of our right.
The only place we could land in the entire area where rescue could happen fast enough was between the Weehawken ferry terminals and Pier 79, where New York Waterways ferries ply the river.
What I really remember about that descent to the river for us was all the noise in the cockpit.
Pull up, terrain ahead.
We got too close to a helicopter, so we got a traffic call out.
Traffic, clear of conflict.
Pull up.
What we had to do was choose to do only the highest priority items and ignore the rest. Fly the airplane and fly it well. Do something we'd never done before in 208 seconds and get it right the first time. As we approached the river, the only control I had over the vertical flight path was to choose how high to begin the landing, when to begin to raise the nose to trade some of our forward speed for a reduced rate of descent at touchdown. But we were descending so quickly, even misjudging that height by a quarter second would be catastrophic. I'd either begin the landing too early and get too slow and drop it in, or begin it too late and hit going too fast nose down. Jeff knew this, and so he began to shift his focus, his priorities. He stopped trying to use the checklist.
I realized we were not going to be able to restart these engines. We were going to be landing this airplane in the Hudson River, and I tried to assist Sully by calling out airspeeds and altitudes to give him situational awareness, because he was focused outside the airplane on where we were actually going to have to land.
I knew it'd be a hard landing, I just didn't know how hard. But I was confident that I could make it survivable, and I was confident I could keep the airplane intact, and if I did that, then it would float long enough for us to be rescued. And so in the last 4 seconds of the flight, the last 100 feet, I began to pull the control stick back, further back, until it was finally fully aft, and hold it there just as we touched. But it was a hard hit, harder in back than in the front.
When we landed in the river, it seemed like the nose of the airplane was going right for the bottom. Water cascaded up on the windshield, but then almost instantly it just popped up. And I remember it rocking back and forth kind of in the waves from the touchdown.
It was obvious to Jeff and me that when we stopped in the river, the airplane was intact, it was stable, it was floating, and people were probably still okay at that point.
Sully and I both looked at each other and we were just surprised that it had worked out so well.
At that moment, Jeff and I turned to each other in the cockpit, at the same time in the same words said, "Well, that wasn't as bad as I thought." My professional obligations, my job wasn't complete until everyone had been accounted for and was safe.
I happened to be looking at Sully right when he received the news that everybody had been saved on board that airplane. And I remember this look of a tremendous relief on his face. And I realized at that moment the worry and the pressure that he had been under for the last few hours since our incident, wondering, had everybody been accounted for?
Many people contributed to this, even though I've gotten all the attention and I've become the public face of it.
I do feel a sense of pride that I accomplished my duties and assisted Sully as best as I could in this situation. I have developed this relationship with Sully over the years, as you might imagine, and that I'm very proud of the fact that I could be his first officer on that day.
I'm very grateful that my crew and all the people involved were up to the many challenges that we faced. It's a source of pride. This event happened when I was 57, almost 58 years old. I'd been flying airplanes for 42 years. I had 20,000 hours of flying time. And in all that time, I had never experienced in flight the actual failure of even a single engine. And I thought it would never happen to me. I was wrong. And I knew in those first seconds that this was going to be one of those events that divides one's life into before and after.
Before he became world famous for his grace under pressure, Chesley's Sully Sullenberger was just a Texas boy who loved airplanes.
We lived near an Air Force base, so I was always seeing jets fly over the house. I could tell you what kind of airplane that one is, what kind of engine it has, how fast it would go, everything about it. I think I knew by the age of 5 I wanted to fly airplanes. My first flight lesson was at age 16, still in high school. My dad was a dentist, and he had a patient who knew a crop duster. And this particular man, L.T. Cook Jr., had been a civilian pilot training instructor before World War II. So drove out to his grass strip east of Sherman, Texas, saw his airplanes, met him, and he agreed to teach me to fly. He charged $6 an hour for the airplane, including the fuel, and $3 an hour for his time. My first solo flight was at 16. It was late on a Saturday afternoon, June 3rd, 1967. L.T. Cook had just mowed the grass on his grass strip. You could smell the cut grass smell. I made 3 circuits of the pattern, 3 takeoffs, 3 landings, and rolled to a stop back at his hangar, and he said, "That was good enough, I'll let you do it again." Very early in my flying career, a friend of LT's had tried to land at his strip, stalled, and crashed nose first into the ground. It was fatal to the pilot, the only occupant. I went out to the scene and with LT looked at the airplane. It was a red and white Piper Tri-Pacer. There was still blood spatter on the inside of the cockpit from where his head had hit the instrument panel. It was a very vivid, graphic reminder that at every point in every flight, you must fly the airplane and fly it well. You have to be the absolute master of every part of it.
The boy who loved airplanes became a man who yearned to find his future in the air.
I knew I wanted to fly for a living. I wasn't sure at the outset exactly how I was going to get where I wanted to go. But like my father and his generation, I felt an obligation to serve in the U.S. military. I chose to go to the Air Force Academy. It was a wonderful education, very intense, and I managed to fly 1,000 hours in airplanes and gliders in the 4 years I was a student there. And upon graduation, I was named the Outstanding Cadet in Airmanship for my class.
It was during his time in the Air Force that Sully learned firsthand how a pilot's decisions in the cockpit can make the difference between life and death.
I had about a dozen friends and colleagues who lost their lives in airplane accidents during their time that I was in the Air Force. Knowing people who've died in aircraft accidents is a terrible weight to bear, but it's also a great motivator. It gives real meaning to the need to continually improve, to continually learn. It's that dedication, that discipline, that diligence, and that's what the best pilots have. At the end of my military service, it was obvious to me that the best flying I'd ever done was already behind me. If I stayed in the Air Force and wanted to be promoted, I was going to have to concern myself more with haircuts and shoe shines in the peacetime military than with flying. And so I chose to leave the military after my service obligation was complete and applied to become an airline pilot. It's quite a transition to go from being a military pilot, especially a military fighter pilot, to being an airline pilot, because we go from an endeavor that is inherently risky to one in which we avoid almost all risk. But being an airline pilot is very satisfying in its own way. At the end of a flight, to have taken several hundred people where they need to or want to go. You literally hold people's lives in your hand.
Sully met the love of his life appropriately enough at the local air traffic control center.
We both worked for the same airline. It was PSA, the one with the smile on the front.
And my airline and other airlines had sent a pilot and an airline marketing official to the regional air traffic control center.
I was a marketing person, and Sully was the airline pilot that was assigned to come that day. He had flown a red-eye the night before, and so he was pretty tired, unshaven, was red-eyed.
I asked her out, and she said yes. But it wasn't love at first sight. We had to grow into it.
I actually canceled our first date. I called his house, and I told him I had a work-related thing, and I canceled it. And then my roommate told me that I was never going to meet the man of my dreams if I stayed at home all the time, and I had to call him back and reschedule.
She quickly became the focus of my affections. I think it was the way that I felt when I was around her.
Sully was always just a stabilizing force in my life. I felt secure and loved, and he's my best friend.
In order to start the family they both dreamed of, Sully and Lori had to take the road less traveled.
Sully and I worked for a long time to have children, and ultimately we adopted both of our daughters.
We were blessed with the gift of girls. It's been a lot of fun seeing who they turned out to be and seeing the beautiful, strong, intelligent young men that they are.
Sully's devotion to his career meant having to accept certain sacrifices when it came to being a parent.
Being an airline pilot, I was gone about 2/3 of every month for 30 years. I missed a lot of the first things, the first words, the first steps. And of course, early in my career, when I wasn't very senior and didn't have a good schedule, Christmas was always the day when Daddy was home, regardless of the number on the calendar.
Though he treasured his time with Lori and the girls, Sully's real home was in the air, doing what he was born to do.
Sully wore the airplane. It was as if he put it on. It wasn't like he went and just flew this machine. It became a part of him.
It's a calling. It's not just a job.
I think to understand Sully, really to know Sully, you have to understand the depth of the character and professionalism of the man. And I know when I flew with Sully, every hour, at precisely 56 minutes past the hour, he would call up the latest weather. When you're flying to a destination that might be even 4 or 5 hours away. And we have to input the temperature, the air, the pressure, the wind speed at the airport into our flight management computers to get our approach speed. All that matters is the last one that you put in before landing. Before that, it doesn't matter. And yet, every hour, at 56 minutes past the hour, he would get the latest weather, he would load that computer, only to do it again an hour later. That kind of devotion to your job, going that extra mile, I think is what makes Sully truly great as an airline pilot.
For Sully Sullenberger, preparation is everything. He has a distinct dislike for surprises.
Sully is a man who likes to plan. He likes to have everything within the box.
When we fly in small airplanes privately, the two of us, he flew us down. Actually, we did a big hike one time, and I'm not fond of flying in smaller airplanes. And I didn't want to go. And I had said to him one day, oh my gosh, they're never going to find our bodies out here. And he said, oh no, I've had an emergency landing site in sight the entire trip. Everywhere we went, I knew where I could ditch the airplane to. So in the back of his head, he's always planning for that eventuality.
But on January 15th, 2009, the man who loved to plan faced a challenge he could not have prepared for.
It was shocking. The startle factor was huge.
He may have had to improvise, but I think he had planned for that day for 40 years.
Everything I'd done in my life contributed to the success of that flight.
He had investigated accidents and has memorized them for years, and so he has studied what went right and what went wrong.
Having studied in detail many previous accidents, it's obvious that above all else, fly the airplane and fly it well. If that isn't done, nothing you do after that will be sufficient.
Captain Sully Sullenberger, with almost no time, became a man for all time.
It took 208 seconds of calm courage in the skies over New York to turn Sully Sullenberger into the top news story on the planet.
I told Lori on the phone from the hotel that night in New York, I think our lives have changed forever. I just, at that point, had no idea exactly how or how much or for how long.
I can't even describe the hum of generators from trucks out in front and news media camped out on the porch, and I was trying to keep the girls going to school. They wanted to do their normal things.
Even as the world marveled at his achievement, for Sully, there was a price to be paid.
They snuck Sully home on a flight. When he got out of the car, I was not prepared for what I saw. He was distant. He had a glazed look in his eye. He certainly didn't come running to me. He had very dark circles under his eyes. He had lost 13 pounds in the 48 hours since the accident. So he was gaunt and distant, and I eventually went to him, and when I gave him a hug, he said, "I hope they know I did the best I could." It was hard the first couple of nights. He had nightmares, and it was hard for him to kind of settle his brain, and he was under a doctor's care because his heart rate and all of that was so elevated at the time.
My resting pulse is normally in the 50s. For 10 weeks, even under a doctor's care, it was 100. My blood pressure resting is normally 108 over 68. For 10 weeks, it was 160 over 100. I would try to read a newspaper or a magazine article and end up rereading the same sentence 5 times, never completely grasping it and finally giving up.
When Flight 1549 happened, I was 14 years old. I was in 8th grade. My dad was different the first few weeks in a sense of he was a lot more quiet, I would say. I think he had so much going on in his head, and for a 14-year-old, I don't think I necessarily appreciated that as much as or understood that, I should say, as much as I do now.
Your brain goes into a protection mode, and I think for a long time, the girls, myself, all of us had some post-traumatic stress. I know a year later, we went through a lot of migraine headaches, our hair started falling out, all of those kind of things.
For those involved in Flight 1549, the shock of being world famous overnight took some getting used to.
What we lost was our privacy. What we lost was our old lives. In fact, many of us on the crew initially were saying in those first few days, I just want my old life back.
Sully's a thoughtful, smart, quiet guy that's not seeking the limelight. I think that's hard to kind of step into that role.
It required us all to very quickly learn a new way of living an entirely new life. And it meant that we had to develop new skills and get better at old ones to be able to be public figures on the world stage.
It was definitely weird at first and trying to figure out what exactly this all meant for our family. And I don't think we ever expected to the extent that this story was going to resonate with everyone else.
We realized that this wasn't going to be your usual 15 minutes of fame and then fade from the news cycle, that this was different.
And once he kind of became a public figure, he couldn't go to the store to get milk. A 20-minute trip would turn into a 2-hour trip just because everyone was stopping him. And when you're in such a great story, you don't want to brush those kinds of people off. It's, it's such a personal connection, especially when you're going in your hometown. People feel like they have an extra special connection to you.
We had gotten into a disagreement about something, I don't even remember what, and I was irritated with him, and so I had gone for a little walk, and I ended up down in the plaza down the way, and I was just wandering around, really, and wandered into this store, and this woman, I could tell right away that kind of look of recognition, and she said, "Oh, you're, Captain Sullenberger's wife, aren't you?" And I thought, okay, today I'm just going to be really authentic, and I said, "Well, yes, I am, but I'm a little irritated with him today." And she said, "Oh, honey, you should just forgive him because he's such an American hero."
For Sully, no adjustment was more difficult than learning to accept the H word.
When people called me a hero, I resisted it. Initially, I thought it wasn't appropriate. But with time, I certainly began to understand better people's need to feel a certain way about this event.
I think to really appreciate why the miracle on the Hudson was so important to so many people was to appreciate the time that this happened.
Because of when it happened during the 08-09 financial meltdown, when it seemed as if everything was going wrong and no one could do anything right. I think some people had begun to doubt human nature, wondering if it was really mostly about self-interest and greed.
The news was so bad and people were so afraid that they just needed that sense of optimism.
This was a bright spot, I think, something that people could grab a hold of and realize that, perhaps, we could climb out of this hole that we had dug ourselves into.
At a time when the world needed hope, these people made it their mission in life to see that good was done and lives were saved. I think that's why, years later, we're still aware of this flight, because of the way it has a continuing power to touch and inspire people.
Dear Captain Sullenberger, our son Connor was born 2 years to the day after that fateful flight. Connor wouldn't be here if you weren't there to save his mother that day.
As the plane came down, I was sure I would never see my children again.
I'll always think of you like the guy from It's a Wonderful Life. You'll never know how many lives you've touched.
Thank you for saving my daddy on the plane.
Grandma didn't make it to Charlotte to visit me, but she said not to be mad at you.
God bless you, Sully.
God bless you, Sully.
God bless you,
God
Sully.
bless
God
you.
bless you, Sully.
God bless you, Sully.
In the first weeks and months, we received, I think, 50,000 communications, letters, emails, faxes from people around the world.
Our house was covered every surface, every counter, every table for a year.
One of the first ones I remember was I received a $5 bill in the mail, and it had a little brief note in it. It said, "Congratulations, enjoy a beer on me, although a cheap domestic one."
Letters come to our house without our street address on them. They're simply, and from Europe, they're addressed Hero Pilot USA, and they come to our house.
One woman from Sacramento wrote us and said, "In the last 6 months, I'd lost my job, I'd lost my house, my father passed away to cancer, I had lost my hope. You, sir, gave it back."
For the Texas boy who dreamed of flying, the decision to hang up his wings was bittersweet.
I had said to him that I felt like he could do more for the profession from a safety standpoint out of the cockpit and not in the cockpit. He didn't have to do any more. He didn't need to fight anymore. He didn't need to try to help anymore. He couldn't change the whole world. It's not all on his shoulders.
It was time for me to leave the airline. Quite frankly, every time I would fly as a public figure, it was noticed and it was kind of disruptive. People
Heard his voice or his name and then, wanted to come up and say something or take a picture. And so, that's a delay.
And it also was time for me to take advantage of other opportunities.
I think we know that now he has a greater voice.
It's given me a bully pulpit to be an advocate for things I've cared about my whole life. For the safety of the traveling public, for the status of our beloved piloting profession. It's an obligation, I feel, that given this opportunity, we owed it to all our colleagues still working in the industry to speak for them. Not to do so would be a dereliction of duty.
From the 16-year-old in a Texas biplane, to the gifted Air Force fighter pilot, to the hero of the Miracle on the Hudson, Sully Sullenberger has excelled at whatever life threw his way. But his favorite role remains family man.
Someone early on asked me what my epitaph should be. And I said, husband, father, pilot.
After 30 years, he still looks at me and says that I'm the love of his life. And with all of the accolades and the stuff that has happened to him, none of that matters to him because it's me or the girls that matter. I think that tells you the measure of the man as well.
It's never lost on me as an actor, the magic of movies.
Although we're not making a documentary, we're making a movie, we wanted things to be as real as possible.
What is required is the DNA of authenticity. If we make choices, they have to philosophically match the reality. And so if I'm playing a guy who's familiar with a cockpit, I better be familiar with a cockpit.
This whole adventure started with Frank Marshall, who gave my business partner and I, Kip, Sully's autobiography.
I got a call from my good friend Harrison Ford, who is also a pilot, and he had been at a dinner in Washington, D.C. with Sully, and they had been talking about Sully's book. Maybe it should be a movie, how to get it to be a movie. Harrison most kindly said, call my friend Frank Marshall.
We all read the book and couldn't decide whether or not we thought it was a movie.
It was obviously a compelling tale, but it was kind of things everybody knew.
When I found out that we were going to do this script, I thought, well, first 10 minutes of the movie is the crash, then what do we do?
But Kip and I decided, well, let's just go see Sully.
And Sully immediately said, oh, I don't think the movie's about the book.
When was your last drink, Captain Sullenberger?
9 days ago.
Drugs?
No, never.
After about 20 minutes with Sully, he said, you know, it wasn't until 6 weeks ago that I didn't know if all of this was going to be taken away from me. And he proceeded to tell us a story that was the inspiration for this screenplay.
I've delivered 1 million passengers over 40 years in the air, but in the end, I'm going to be judged on 208 seconds.
I was reading some other things at the time, and every night the girls in my office would say, have you read this thing on Sully? About the third time, I thought, well, there must be some reason. So I picked it up and read it and liked it right away.
Clint gets on the phone and he says, you know why I'm the perfect director for this? I think I'm the only director in Hollywood that's had an emergency water landing. I was like, you had an emergency water landing?
I was 21 at the time, and I was a passenger on a Navy plane. I was in the Army, but I was catching a free flight, and it was bad weather. We went down off of Point Reyes, California.
He and the pilot had to swim several miles to shore as it was getting dark, so quite a close call.
He had a kind of personal connection with what it's like to go through something like that.
When Clint read the script, things began to happen, and they began to happen very quickly.
I don't feel like a hero. I'm just a man who was doing his job.
Clint told us that it was important to him that he come to our house and meet us before he made any casting decisions.
Sully has a kind of everyman quality, you know? He's just a normal, really lovely man. And I think it really reminded Clint of Jimmy Stewart, who Clint knew, of course.
And Clint said, who's today's Jimmy Stewart? And of course, it was Tom Hanks.
When you're kind of making a list in your mind of possible people who could play it, Tom was one of the first people we thought about. We didn't think he'd be available at that time. I think he was planning on taking a little time off.
For about 6 years, my head was down and I was plowing through a work schedule, which really meant mentally, spiritually, physically, I was beat. But now look, I'm a selfish actor. I'm a competitive actor. And the screenplay that Todd wrote plays, I think, just like the movie did. I think I read it in probably 17 minutes.
He got 5 pages in and said, well, this isn't what I expected. And then he got 20 pages in and he's like, wow.
I even had to call my wife. She said, so how was it? And I said, it's so great. And she said, oh, well, then I guess you're just going to have to go off and do it then, aren't you?
You find out that Tom Hanks is joining the Clint Eastwood movie that you're doing, and it's Christmas on top of Christmas.
Clint, as a director, just creates an amazingly calm set, and he has incredible authority just by how he carries himself.
Anybody who is going to work with Clint searches out the people who have to find out if any of the stories are true. It turns out they all are. All of the stories are true. He does not say action. He does not say cut.
Hey, stop. Okay, stop.
They don't even say rolling. His crew is trained to settle it down. So if you're approaching the set when they're about to start doing a scene, you see all these people that go like this, and that means we're rolling.
The set is just relaxed and quiet and focused on the work.
It's unlike any set I've ever been on. It's so quiet, so respectful.
Oh, well, I wish the bank felt the same way. It's just heaven being on his sets. To be honest, I didn't read the script. Clint asked me to be a part of something, and I said yes. When someone as wonderful as Clint Eastwood asks you to be a part of something, you just jump in.
Laura, we're not going to lose the house.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry, I'm anxious and I'm alone and not enough sleep.
There's no mystery why so many films that he makes, the actors are nominated or they win. Because of his life as an actor, everything he does is in service of creating comfort and a zone for the actor to do their best.
I really kind of feel like he has more respect for actors than anybody I've ever seen. There's so much trust in his eyes with what he's watching.
LaGuardia Tower, 1549, we're trying to make 1-3.
No relay, we got no power.
You're down. He has experienced everything, both good and bad, that can happen on a set. Everything that can get in the way of making the movie well. And so he does not want to be a barrier between the film and the making of the film.
He doesn't say anything unless he has to. He lets everybody do their job, and that's great.
You are looking for human error, then make it human.
He just wants to see what you're intuitively going to bring to the role instead of telling you what to do. There is still an X in this result. And it's you, Captain Sullenberger. Remove you from the equation and the math just fails.
He puts an awful lot of stock in the actor bringing it at the moment. And it's true, he doesn't do a lot of takes, but he does a massive amount of coverage. So you have an ocean of opportunity in order to find the scene. And you can even say, could I have another pass at that?
Boss, can I give you one finger? Boss.
And he'll say, no, I think it would, I was really impressed the way it happened just then. And he wanted to say, well, I inverted the lines and I don't think the pronouns were even proper. But what he's saying is that you're going to have another chance at it. So let's not waste time on something that I'm not going to use.
Got to count. 155. 155. It's official. 155. 155.
Tom Hanks is an extraordinary actor. He really is. He's what I call a big boy.
The thing that's so fabulous about him is he's such a chameleon.
Tom, of course, is someone who can transform himself, and he will become the character.
It's kind of eerie to watch the monitors and see how much he is like Sully.
I feel like he just suddenly starts to channel him. He just sort of sinks into the character. His face changes, his eyes change, his voice changes.
This was dual engine loss at 2,800 feet, followed by an immediate water landing with 155 souls on board. No one has ever trained for an incident like that. No one. You're always intimidated. Look, you walk away from something, you say, I'll never sound like him, I'll never look like him. Hopefully I can embody some aspect, capture some part of his personality, his characteristics, his gravitas. Please ask how many practice runs they had.
17.
Just when I think Tom is going to explode in rage, he gets quieter.
17.
And I realize from what I've seen of Sullenberger, it's probably exactly what he would do.
The pilot who landed at Teterboro had 17 practice attempts.
And it cuts deeper that way.
He is Sully, and then when we say cut, suddenly he's cracking jokes, and he's the Tom I know and love.
He has a great sense of humor, so that makes it fun. Whatever you're doing, everybody can still laugh about it.
Yes! Everybody loves being around him. He has a joke for everybody.
Aaron Eckhart, screaming co-pilot.
He involves everybody.
Brace for impact.
He's a guy who's conscientious about the energy and people having a good time, but he's absolutely specific and thorough with his work.
I've played a number of people who are still alive. So I've had that experience of going to somebody's house and saying, hey, for good or for bad, I'm playing you in this movie. I hope you've made your peace with that, because they almost always want somebody else, They always want somebody bigger, stronger, deeper voiced, something like that. But with him, I felt as though the hardest thing I would have to embody was the level of experience, the expertise that went along with that, because, man, he's got an awful lot of it.
Tom and I went up north to the Virgin Atlantic simulator, and we practiced on that for a few hours.
The simulator, it's the most lifelike experience you have. It feels exactly as though you're in a plane, and it looks so much like you're actually in a plane, it's amazing. It requires no imagination. The simulator is where pilots have to go again and again and again and again, and they've got to fly these planes, crash them, not crash them, whatever, and if they don't do it, they do not work at their jobs.
It's not as easy as it looks.
What do I do?
Tom and I both crashed horribly.
Oh, there was crashing going on, without a doubt.
Caution, obstacle.
We crashed the simulator. We didn't break it, but we crashed it.
It was great because we had the actual flight plan of this flight with the birds coming in.
Birds. The bird strike happened at the exact same time, and it wasn't anything other than a kind of like flip, you know, it went like that. And luckily we had the flight plan. We knew what we were supposed to do. We pushed the buttons when we were supposed to push the buttons, which we worked on a lot. Are they actually manually moving the rudders at that time? We didn't want to look like guys that don't really know what they're doing. What do I say at 100? We didn't want to just touch a button if we did not understand what we did. So Clint could not say to us, hey, reach over and flick some buttons for it. We wouldn't, no, they didn't do it. We would never do it. There's no reason to.
Hold up.
Race. You do get a sense of how short a period of time it was. How many decisions and feelings had to go into literally 36 seconds. It scared the living daylights out of Aaron and myself because we thought, how are we going to make live these moments when we're in a static cockpit on a film set?
Today, we're at Universal Studios. We have behind us an A320. It's a complete airplane. It was disassembled and brought here.
Well, you'd think you only see an A320 in the water once in your life, but it's happened twice now.
We got all the wide shots in New York that the visual effects will add the plane to later, but we needed all the tight shots and the things with the actors and seeing them jump in the water and everything that happened in the drama.
Wrap this around her leg. Make it tight.
Just the engineering and the logistics of how movies come together is fantastic. We have a huge crane here.
The gimbal that we had in Falls Lake was a 350-ton gimbal that we put the plane on.
There's 5 10-inch hydraulic cylinders running at 2,000 psi, so that's a lot of power to lift that aircraft. We can lift it straight up and down on 3 of them, and we can pitch and roll it on 2 others.
When the plane started sinking on both of the wings during the shot, you saw it go down.
Evacuate. I'll tell you, the first thing everybody said is, man, there's a lot of people on this plane.
Everyone, exits are unusable. Move forward to the overwing exit.
I thought, are you going to get all these people out of here?
We're evacuating the plane right now. So we've landed in the water, and now various scenarios are going on with the passengers. We inflated the emergency ramps, and we all went down those and had a good time.
The logistics of setting up that shot was amazing. They had 5 cameras, and it was a master shot of everybody coming out on the wings, of getting into the slides, which then became the life rafts. You know, it was 155 people that they were shooting, and it looked amazing.
Oh, look at that, man. Come on. You don't see this every day, people.
We also built a couple facades for some of the ferry boats that we could bring up and match.
Come on, buddy. Sully himself and Lori came to the set when we were up there, and they happened to be there just while we were shooting one of the life raft scenes. We had no rehearsal on it, so when we did it, kaboom, you know, it inflated, and then we did everybody jumping into it, and then we had to climb back up to it in order to figure out how to disconnect it from the fuselage. We had no idea how to do this. So there's like levers you're supposed to find and things you're supposed to open, and stuff you're supposed to pull. Can we do this? All of this while the camera is running. Both Aaron and myself feel like dopes because Clint doesn't rehearse such things because he wants it to be realistic. Well, man, oh man, was it realistic. We were trying to pull it, we were trying to bite, we were trying to do everything. I finally found this little emergency knife after about 45 seconds of us flailing. Oh, Jeff, look, Kay, Lynn, I have you.
Not on the checklist.
This on the day that Sully and Laurie have visited the set. So afterwards, I found him and I said, look, I gotta apologize. We had no rehearsal, so we did not know how to disconnect the raft from the aircraft. And he said to me, neither did we. Pilots had never done that. They had never jumped into a raft, so they had to search around for it as well. How about that?
It wasn't just me, it was all of us. It was Jeff and Donna and Sheila and Doreen and all of the passengers, the rescue workers, the air traffic control, the ferry boat crews and the scuba cops. We all did it. We survived.
Clint wanted to try to use as many of the people that were actually there, not only as consultants with us, but we also put in the movie.
We ended up using the real ferry captain that was the first ferry to arrive.
Keep it coming, Paulie. I see you on one.
It's kind of an adrenaline rush to be with the real ferry boat captain that actually just spun into action immediately.
The people were actually in the raft and looking up, and, you know, they were all actors, so they were acting scared and wet and cold, and it was just like that day almost, just like it.
When we were in New York, we had the opportunity to use the real rescue divers. It was really a thrill to have the two real guys jumping out of the helicopter, reenacting what they did on the day.
This is the job that kind of defines your career. I became a New York City cop to help people, and this was the opportunity to have that done and have it done on such a great event.
Everybody wanted to be involved because the experience is such an incredible memory for them.
It's really a highlight to not only my career with the Red Cross, but my career as a responder.
They embody what it is to be a New Yorker. You show up, you work your ass off, and you don't ask for any applause. In the shooting of the movie, they just wanted to make sure it was captured correctly.
They said, well, we have to have it be some way, so it might as well be the way it was.
When you're recreating these events, it does feel a little bit like you were there.
All those attentions to detail have been really important for Clint. We don't deviate very much from the real look and the real feeling.
I want you to know I did the best I could.
Everybody behaved to their fullest self on that day.
Grab your life vest, please.
And that's why it deserves the treatment it's getting with everybody that's involved in this movie, the high level of professionalism, the rescuers, obviously Sully and Skiles, and everyone to a person is being matched by the movie makers.
Clint had a very clear vision for how to tell this story. He said, I just get my idea that I want to do something, and I just will it to happen. And as I've been on the set for the first time on a shoot, it's obvious to me that what really happens is he wills it, and then 100 or more people create it and make it happen under his direction. It's really a loving army of artisans.